Since the reception on my last video was so positive, I wanted to make another one. I have a lot of irons in the fire as far as video essays go, so I wanted to start something simple and consistent to put out in the meantime. So welcome to the first video in my Why Nobody Uses series. A series where I cover suboptimal choices of characters in fighting games. Not necessarily the characters themselves, but in their tools, like V-skills, V-triggers, supers, or ultras, depending on the game in question. And obviously when I say why nobody uses, I mean why most players don't use these tools. Of course, some players will use these, and the goal isn't to dissuade anyone from using them, but to get a dialogue going to spread understanding on the systems within the games we play. I want to start with the most unused V-triggers in Street Fighter V, and I'm going in character release order, which means Ryu is our first character, and his V-trigger 2 is our first V-trigger to cover in the series. So let's get started. Ryu's V-trigger 2 is Kako Fubatsu. It's a 2-bar trigger that gives Ryu access to a 2-frame parry that crumples the opponent on a successful parry. For reference, his V-skill 1 parry is 3 frames. Get ready to hear about V-skill 1 a lot. It has a lot to do with this trigger's lack of use. The activation itself is identical to VT1, so the same post-activation combos work across both triggers. However, V-trigger 2 doesn't give Ryu Shoryuken additional juggle potential like V-trigger 1, so this activation route doesn't work in V-trigger 2. Unlike most parries, it actually damages the opponent. The damage is actually good, but the follow-ups are limited. Your choices are mostly between damage and Oki and how much meter you want to spend. If you want meterless max damage, Heavy Shoryuken is the best follow-up. If you want to spend 1 bar for more damage, you can EX Donkey Kick into Heavy Shoryuken. If you really want, you can spend another bar for more damage and EX the Shoryuken as well, but it's not going to be worth it in most cases. If you want to cash out, obviously Heavy Shoryuken into CA will be your best bet. This is a better use of meter than the 2-bar conversion. For Oki, however, the only route that grants good pressure requires 1 bar, and it's EX Donkey Kick into Light Tatsu. You're plus 4 after 2 dashes. That pretty much covers the viable punishes after a successful parry. Now, how can you use VT2 to get a successful parry? Pretty much any situation you can get a V-skill 1 parry, which is part of the issue with VT2. It just doesn't open up new opportunities for Ryu. So let's use an example where Ryu gets either parry on a reliable reaction for a punish. Mika's dropkick is perfect for this scenario. First, let's see how much damage we get on a meterless optimal punish for a V-skill 1 parry. V-skill 1 got 245 damage. That's a decent meterless punish, and the opportunity cost is just running V-skill 1 over V-skill 2, which will get its own video later in this series, but let's compare V-trigger 2. V-trigger 2 punished harder with 267. So, is a 22 damage difference here a point in its favor? Kind of. But how good a 22 damage difference is depends on the context. A 1-bar combo that gets 22 damage over its meterless variant would be kind of weak, but a 2-bar combo that gets 22 damage over a 1-bar combo can be considerable in the right situation. In this context, the 22 damage is tied to the opportunity cost of running V-trigger 2 over V-trigger 1. The trade-off is terrible in this context. To its credit, in this scenario, the more meter you spend, the more VT2 pulls ahead in damage versus V-skill 1, but even considering that, it's not worth running. So we've established that V-trigger 2 only makes punishes Ryu can already get with V-skill 1 slightly more damaging. But V-Trigger 2 actually has one strength in common with one of the strongest 2-bar triggers in the game, Cammy VT1. Cammy's VT1 enhances all her dive kicks, spiral arrows, and cannon spikes for a short time, and these enhanced moves consume half the timer. Optimizing use of this timer and knowing when to save it is one of the most important skills in playing Cammy, but what does it have in common with Ryu's V-Trigger 2? The answer is mind games. Cammy becomes incredibly scary in the air when VT1 is active. She becomes harder to anti-air, and most players don't even risk it unless their character has a parry. Ironically, Ryu's VT2 actually lines up pretty well versus her VT1 dive kick. The power of Cammy's VT1 is in the dive kick and the mind game around it. It's hard to anti-air, and if you try and fail, she'll get a huge punish. And if you block it, she's extremely plus. If you V-reversal too early, she might go through you and get a punish before she even gets hit, depending on your character. If you delay your V-reversal until she switches sides, she can usually throw you in reaction. All of these outcomes are good for Cammy and part of why she's still a high tier even with such a basic set of tools.
Fight.
The layer beneath the surface is the common convention that attempting to anti-air Cammy during VT1 is not worth the risk. Cammy can abuse this fear by just jumping at the opponent. If the opponent lets Cammy jump out of fear of a dive kick, Cammy's VT1 gave her mileage for nothing. Cammy's VT1 is strong if you use it, and strong if you don't use it. Ryu's VT2 has a similar scary prospect, and you can see it displayed on the rare occasion you find a Ryu player using it at mid to high level. The threat of Ryu's VT2 parry is scarier than the actual parry. Even though it doesn't add any additional layers to Ryu's defense because V-Skill 1 and V-Trigger 2 beat the same things and lose to the same things, VT2 actually ends up being better as an offensive tool rather than a defensive one. So this trigger ends up being stronger if you don't use it, and weaker if you do, where Cammy's is strong either way. When you block a solar plexus from Ryu while VT2 is active, you have to fear the damage he can get if he uses the parry. Sure, he can do this with V-Skill 1 as well, but how confident are you that a player that has already told you he doesn't care by bringing VT2 into the match isn't going to go for the parry? The Ryu player can abuse this fear to get walk-up throws or just by stealing turns in general. That's all well and good, but as mentioned previously, he can just use V-Skill 1 for to this same end. He just gets more damage. I haven't detailed VT1's strengths much throughout this video, and even though it's still a middle-of-the-road trigger, it at least adds some layers to Ryu's offense, giving him more optimal damage conversions via juggles and other routes, and also letting him play mind games with his charged fireballs, as well increasing the damage on his critical art. VT2 is one of the more disappointing triggers in the game. Maybe it could have been better if it allowed more follow-ups, maybe allowing solar plexus after the crumple, but by my math, that's 577 damage on an optimal CA combo after a parry, which is insane, but only doubles down on its current strengths instead of addressing its weaknesses. Another option would be making it counter throws, which is not design space I would like to enter, and it would require significant nerfs in other ways to account for such a buff. I think Capcom should just ignore this trigger and give Ryu more meaningful buffs in other areas where he obviously struggles. Thanks for watching.